So anyway, let me begin. The East Cascades Audubon Society is sponsoring a tremendous program here with volunteer citizen sciencery. We've got over 400 people now doing primary people doing surveys. Wait a second. Wait a minute. Why is this not working? There we go. Okay. Let me just go run down the goals that we kind of established when we first started it. Obviously, we're counting birds of prey during the winter months. This is a wintering survey project to see how birds make it through that part of their life cycle each year. Putting productive survey routes together is a really important thing, because not only allows us to get lots of birds involved in the database, but it also is something that keeps people attracted to the project. So I'm not having too much difficulty starting up each consecutive year with at least 95% of the people that have were in the previous year, they've joined again. So productive routes means a lot of birds to be seen, which attracts people and keeps people on board. Gordon alluded to my career with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I did an awful lot of survey work, wildlife survey work for those 15 years there, and came up with different, did different types of surveys. And one of the things that I decided that I wanted to do with this project is to make sure that the way that the surveys were run was a simple method, something that people could get through easily and not be burdened down with so many finite details. So basically the project is designed just to count the numbers for each species that is seen. The only extra data that's collected is ages for bald eagles. And some people will also provide sex differentiations for birds like kestrels and harriers, but that's an optional thing that's not required. A lot of studies in the past use such things as the distance of the bird from the person who sees it, which direction it's flying, or whether it's perched on a pole or on the ground or whatever. That kind of information burdens people in the field when they're doing these surveys, at least the type of people that I was trying to attract. So I kept the method simple. Just drive the route, count the birds, record them on your data sheet, and that way we know what species are there and how many numbers. That's the basic information that we're collecting. One of the things that I wanted to do early on in the project that I had no technological knowledge for was to be able to display density and distribution patterns for the various species throughout the project area. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago that Kevin Black-Tansky, who is a member of ECAS and a tremendous resource for GIS mapping skills, came on board and started helping me portray the data in map form so that you could visualize where birds are and what densities. And I'm going to show you some of those maps as we get into the project. But that was a desire of mine to see where people could go to see concentrations of birds that they wanted to see. And the maps will show you how we did that. One of the things that I also want to do is make sure that I provided the findings to everybody that participated. And in that manner, I put together a monthly survey summary chart that lists all of the routes and then all of the birds and the numbers that were seen that particular month. Those monthly surveys or charts go out to each of the project volunteers at the end of the month. the beginning of the next month after I get it compiled. And it's a good source of information, keeps people engaged. And that's what I wanted to make sure would happen, so that the interest level stays high. And I do this every month. So every month I email with every person in the project to maintain that contact. When they submit their findings each month, I email them and thank them for the data, and maybe a brief discussion on what they found. And then, like I said, I do that with everybody. So it's a busy job. And then one of the things really is important in a project like this is to make sure that the volunteers that want to participate, that have the desire to do the survey work, remain engaged. And that's important from the standpoint of evaluating data over the course of many years. If you have one person doing surveys on one particular route for 10 years, for example, the data collected is much more valuable than if you had 10 people doing it once a year, or every year a different person. Each person looks at habitat differently. Each person searches for birds differently. And so by keeping a constant in having one person do a route over many years, those data are much easily comparable than if you had a whole bunch of people involved over a number of years to do it, collecting the data. So that is important for me, not only to maintain that cohesiveness, but it also allows me the flexibility of not having to go out and find a ton of people every day, every year in the fall when I'm gearing up for this thing to start the next year's effort. I get more than 95% return from the people that participated the year before. So that makes my job easier to find people to fill the holes that are created. Plus it gives me more of a chance to develop more routes for the project, spend some more time doing that. So also, as far as the survey protocol is concerned, we do surveys once a month for December, January, and February. That's the primary survey season, the dead of winter. Other options are available for more surveys. You can do surveys more than once a month if you want to. You can also do surveys during November and March. November and March are getting into migratory activity, and because we're focusing mainly on wintering populations, those 2 months are not they're optional. Provides good bookends for the winter. We can see changes in bird numbers and where they're at different times during November and March. So it's good that way. I collect the data and it's part of the project, but the primary months are December through February. In this project, volunteers get to choose the days that they do their surveys. I totally get that everybody has a life to lead besides counting raptors. So to the point where people can do their surveys that fits their own life schedule each month, that's what we prefer. And a lot of other kinds of projects or survey programs like this will pick a certain day of a month or a certain day during the winter to do a count. And you run the risk there of running into bad weather. Bad weather is not too conducive to doing raptor counts because these birds are trying to survive the winter. And if there's raging snowstorms or rain or anything like that, they're going to seek shelter to preserve that body calorie content, and they're going to be out of sight to the viewer. So I try and give as much flexibility to the survey dates as I can by having the volunteers choose those days to fit their life schedule and also to work around weather problems if there are any. People should be comfortable with Raptor ID work, but willing to learn more, and it will happen.
Recording in progress.
Getting feedback there. Anyway, so if people can can ID comfortably the main birds of the project, then I welcome their participation, and we learn together. As you're going to see through the slides that I have in here, give you an indication of how you can learn to identify different species that maybe you're not so comfortable with. You do need optics. Binoculars are pretty much required. Spotting scopes are optional if you have them, that's great, but they're expensive, so I don't require those. Again, surveys trying to be done during good weather. That's a big help for the birds and big help for you guys too, because you know, part of the fun of these projects is seeing as many birds as you can on a survey. And if they're hiding from you because they're cold and wet and they don't want to expend the energy and they don't want to be seen, then you're not going to have as good a time doing it. And I've compared surveys of my own, getting caught in a survey in a bad storm that comes up at, say, the middle of the day. You know, it's really difficult to find birds when it's really nasty weather. So I've compared it with going out like the next day after the storm's gone and count birds, and it's a big difference in numbers that you see. So trying to get good weather surveys is great. Another key element is the speed at which you drive the routes. It's really advantageous if you can do the work such that you can thoroughly scope out the habitat and look for the birds in an easy manner. If you race through the project or through the survey, you're going to miss birds. And the idea is to try and find out a maximum number of birds that are present during their survey to see what your area is holding. And if everybody does that, then we have a really good indication of population levels throughout the project area. And in this project, we record all the birds. That includes birds that you cannot identify. Maybe you're looking at a bird that's far away that you don't know whether it's an eagle or a rough-legged hawk or a red-tailed hawk or something. The silhouette's bad, but you know it's a raptor. So I have options available for reporting your data as unidentified, so that at least we know there is a buteo or a falcon or an accipiter or an eagle or something that's out there that should be a part of the project. And then, of course, safety is the #1 goal. We have nasty weather and nasty conditions throughout the winter months, and we've been very fortunate not to have any major accidents, and we're approaching 1 million miles of driving now. And I'll show you a chart here in a minute that gives you the exact numbers. The first thing that I do when I try and increase and develop the project is find an area that hasn't been surveyed yet. A couple of years ago, I finally moved the project into Washington, and the Spokane area was one of the areas that I was focusing on. So I'm providing a map here to show you how I built the routes. First of all, I'm the old school guy. I don't do it on computer. I get my maps off of DeLorme Atlas and Gazetteer books, tape them together, and then I hop online, go on to Google Maps aerial photos, and then I start looking. I start looking at the habitat, looking for agricultural areas primarily, because we're looking for places where birds are going to congregate. And agricultural areas will provide the food base necessary for birds to be around and hang around. So I look for that. And also I look for road conditions. If you've got a nice looking piece of habitat, but it's a dirt road in the middle of winter, you might have problems. So I try and keep the road system in check using heavily graveled roads or paved roads where possible, and hopefully some of them that have power lines on them so that we can have perch sites for birds. And this is the mosaic that I built around Spokane. It's increased since then, but this was the first year that I had. It's expanded west and southwest since this picture was made. But once the routes are established, I go ahead and provide a route to a prospective volunteer who wants to do it. And I develop a a data form, which I'll show you in the next slide, particular to the route that follows the trail that you see on each one of these different routes in sequence, so that a person gets at the start and he can just drive the whole thing based on what's on the data form. And then for the first year, each route and each new route is massageable. When I look at the area, I'm guesstimating what I can see as a good route, but I ask for input from the volunteer that takes the route on to provide their input of their local knowledge, so that by the end of the first year, we can make changes to the route path based on information that I can see from the maps, plus the information that the volunteer provides. And it's very seldom that a route path is not changed after the finishing up of the first year. Some subtle changes mostly, but sometimes there's been some significant changes, but not much. And then the idea is to have a standardized route path to go forward with. So any changes that are done during the first winter, and then after that we're in concrete and we're surveying the same route path year after year after year, which then allows us to compare data and see what's happening on each route from year to year. The survey data collection form is the primary document in this project. You'll see on the left-hand column there a list of roads. That's the sequential driving that the volunteer does based on what you saw in the previous maps. And then it's just a matter of each, when you go from road segment to road segment, just recording what you find. And this is an example of what was found on the Fort Rock route back in November 19th in 2019. This is a heck of a route, by the way. If anybody has ever gone down into Christmas Valley or Fort Rock area during the wintertime, there's beaucoup birds of prey, as you can see on this route. But anyway, these are unique to each route, obviously, because they have the specific road segments that are in that route, and you can see how the data is displayed and how it's reported back to me, so that I can collate it and put it into my monthly charts. I wanted to put a monthly chart on here, but I would need a whole room-sized screen to do it because it's a monstrous Excel chart. Anybody that does these projects knows what it looks like, because when I send them to them, they're big. So these are some of the basic numbers that we've amassed over this last 17 years. We've had a total of 18,477 possible surveys that could have been done. And we've done 13,834 of them, for about 75%. The primary winter season, we've had an opportunity to do 11,177. We've done 9,883 for about 84%. The citizen science-y part of this thing involves people hours, and the survey hours that we've amassed is pushing 60,000 hours, and that's just counting the primary volunteer. You could probably easily triple this on the average, because there's usually a carload of people on these projects. Very seldom do you have just one or two. It's a fun way to get out in the day, spend with friends and family. So we could bump that hours significantly, but for tracking purposes, I don't keep track of the number of people in each car for each survey, for each route. So I just use one, and that's how many hours we've spent. And then we've put almost 935,000 miles of transects covered over the 17 years. And just as a comparison, that's almost 4 round trips to the moon. So we've put a lot of effort into this project so far, and it's pretty awesome. I know it's a tremendous gas burning thing. And the carbon footprint that we all put into this is significant. But if you want to do a project like this, you got to do the work. And this is the only way that you can do it. So that's it. Okay, now how we got the project started. I started it up with these 4 routes that are in black in the Willamette Valley outside of Albany, and did those 2 routes or those 4 routes for 2 winters. And what I would do is every time I did a survey, I would report the results onto OVAL. And pretty soon I was developing quite an interest from a lot of folks that were quite curious and pleased to see the numbers that were being reported. And I was generating interest those 2 years. And so the 3rd year, and these first 3 years are before the project started. This is just on our own. The 3rd year, because I had some friends developing an interest in this in the Willamette Valley, I was able to put together another 8 routes, as you see in red here. And during that time, Chuck Gates, are you there, Chuck?
Yes.
He's there, hopefully. Anyway, he caught wind of what I was doing, and
I'm here.
okay, there you are. There you go. Hi, Chuck. He caught wind of this effort that I was doing and asked me if I could help him set up some surveys over in the Bend area. And I said, sure. So I put some together for him and he built some himself. And so what we had for that 3rd winter of Raptor survey work was the red and the black that you see on this map. So after that 3rd season, I was pretty well convinced that there was enough interest to take this statewide. And I knew that this was going to be a big project, but I was committed to it myself. So I started contacting people around the state that I knew and then following up on it. Actually, what I did first of all was I looked up all of the Christmas bird count circles in the state and contacted the compilers and tried to either get them involved or if they knew of anybody in the local area that might be interested in doing a route. And so by that time, I was really ramping up that summer. And then Chuck came back and he says, hey, what are you doing? He says, I was thinking of doing the same thing with ECAS. And he says, do you want to join hands here together and work on it? And I said, sure. So this became an ECAS, or at the time it was the East Cascades Bird Conservancy. And so with Chuck's help, not only with helping me administer it, but also using his contacts to get more people involved, we were able to add 56 more routes from the previous winter and went into the 1st season with 79 routes to survey as an ECBC project. And so then it was just a matter over the next several years to add more routes through the effort. Word got up, word got around, people started talking more about it. I developed more routes as people came to me expressing interest. And at the end of 2011, I can't see my right-hand column because I've got, wait a minute, let me see if I can move this over. Yeah, anyway, back it up, sorry. So anyway, at the end of this year, I had put up, we developed 148 routes, and I felt like we were getting full in Oregon. And originally, of course, this was an Oregon project sponsored by ECAS at that point then. And but I was getting anxious about how Oregon fit in with the rest of the Northwest. And so I targeted Idaho that first expansion year. And we started up with the Boise area primarily and a few outlying routes that you see in red there. That was the first year that we expanded outside of Oregon. And then the next bunch of years after that, we filled pretty much Idaho. We got more routes in Oregon and expanded it up into the Columbia River area of Washington and put in a few routes down in the California portion of the Klamath Basin. And so by the end of this winter here, we had 311 routes after adding 132 more routes. And so the last year or two, when we were developing at this stage, I kept looking at that big blank area up there in Washington. I thought, do I really want to expand up there and commit even more of my time? And I said, sure, why not? So the next year, I concentrated on the eastern half of Washington, and that's where you saw that Spokane map earlier, and managed to put in 81 routes in that next year. And of course, you know, I continued adding routes here and there in Idaho, and I think I had one or two more in Oregon, but most of it, the effort was being put into developing eastern Washington. And of course, that went really well. And then last year, I decided to move on the west side of Washington and pretty much got everything south of Olympia into the project. There isn't that much more expansion that can be done more than what you see in this on these red dots in western Washington, because it's kind of mountainy. You're doing a lot of valley surveys and agricultural areas that are tucked into valleys, and so this was pretty much a full coverage for what could be covered for routes in the project. And you notice that I also added some areas way down here in the low right-hand corner for Utah. We got 3 routes in Utah. So it was well into covering Washington at this point. But there was still some areas left that needed some coverage. So this year, and I'm going to show you this map here, there's 29 routes showing. That's all we could get into the mapping that Kevin had time for. And since then, I've added another, well, it went to 43 today, another 14 more routes that doesn't show on this map yet. But I concentrated on getting the area up by Seattle covered, and particularly areas around the Skagit and Samish Flats areas, which are really well-known winter raptor areas. And I was able to fill the last route tonight of the 17 that I built up there. So I'm happy with that expansion there. And then, of course, we've added a few more over here on the west and eastern side of Washington. I also developed a bunch of routes in the Yakima area here, but I haven't had any response from anybody. I contacted the Audubon Society chapter there, and the guy that is heavy into birding there said that I would have a difficult time finding people from the chapter, which has been true. I've advertised it on Inland Northwest Birders and also on Tweeters, but still haven't gotten a nibble there. But that's okay. It's a work in progress. We'll get some people eventually. But anyway, right now we're sitting at 495 routes for the project. Mm-hmm. And that's going to probably be in excess. It's going to be pushing 29,000 miles of survey transect work every month. Okay, so these are the birds that we've found so far en route. And we've, the top line is all the buteos. Got red tails, rough-legged hawks, red-shouldered hawk, ferruginous hawk, Swainson hawk, and one lone zone-tail hawk, which I'll talk about later. And then we have 5 falcons, the kestrel, the merlin, the peregrine, the prairie, and the gyrfalcon. A couple of eagles, 3 accipiters, Cooper, sharpshin, and northern goshawk. And then a couple of extras like white-tailed kite and harrier and the osprey. And then 12 species of owls, which is pretty remarkable, actually. Some of them are really difficult to find. But we got the great horned owls, the barn owl, the burrowing owl, short-eared owl, long-eared owl, and pygmy owl on the top line, and then the western screech owl, the barred owl, great gray owl, snowy owl, northern hawk owl, and the saw-whet owl. So these are the species, and then up in the upper right-hand corner, we've had 2 instances of caracaras being on the routes, but they have not been at a time when we had an active survey. So they're not officially in the database, but they're there. The 5 most prevalent species that you can just about count on in most areas are these 5: the bald eagle, kestrel, red-tailed hawk, rough-legged hawk, and northern harrier. These 5 species comprise of just a little over 92% of all the birds that are counted on all of the surveys throughout the project area. You can see that by and large, with the exception of the bald eagles, you have a little slightly downtrend on as you go through the winter months, except for the eagles. And that's to be expected. You're going to have deaths in the population. You're going to have birds moving around. If, for example, an area gets dumped on snow with 2 or 3 feet, like up in McCall, Idaho, they get bombed with snow. Anyway, things do decline a little, but not that much. And it's surprising how close these percentages are from year to year. It doesn't vary more than a couple of percentage points. Pretty crazy. Okay, so from here on in, it's just going to be going through some of the pictures that I have for each species. And I should mention here that most of the pictures that you're going to see have been provided by the volunteers that are in the project. They don't necessarily catch the photos on their route surveys, but they are in their areas. And so, and I do have some friend photographers that have also supplied some pictures when our guys couldn't. We had, when I put this together, put up a PowerPoint presentation together that's on the ECAS website a couple of summers ago. I asked the volunteer base if anybody would like to donate pictures. And you're going to see Chuck's name quite prevalently in here. He's a good photographer. But we got a lot of response. So I had a really nice pool of pictures to draw from. And these are some of the better ones that you're going to see in the rest of the slides here. Red-tailed hawk, of course, as the previous slide showed, this is the king of the project. He's almost close to 47% of the birds that are seen every winter are these guys. Very common throughout the whole area. This gives you an idea of how inclusive they are in the whole project area. And the maps that you're going to see here represent 2 winters ago, before I expanded over into Western Washington. We haven't updated these maps yet to cover last year. But I did provide over here in the left-hand corner, you'll see these blue numbers on each of the slides that have maps. These are the number of routes that they were located on at the end of last winter. So the red is the winter that matches up with the map, and the blue is numbers that we had last winter to add it into the total. And you can see there's only 2 routes that haven't had a red-tailed hawk recorded on them. The maps became a very key element about 5 years ago, like I said earlier in the intro, when Kevin Black-Tansky came on board with the project and he was able to take my Excel charts that I've been maintaining with data and put them into picture form. So now, for example, this picture here and the next 2, I'm going to show you December, January, and February of that winter, show you the difference. This allows us, first of all, to see concentrations of where birds will be in bigger numbers throughout the whole project area. And when you go from month to month, you're going to see some of these big circles disappear and become smaller circles in January. There are certain areas that still maintain big numbers, but then in February, numbers change again. These maps for the 14 most numerous species of birds in the project are located on the ECAS website. And I encourage you to go to that ecaudubon.org and go into the Raptor survey section of the website, and you can pull up these individual maps for individual species, and you can look at the differences from year to year and from month to month within a season. And so that was something that I really wanted to do when I first started the project, but I had no technical expertise, and really that kind of technical stuff wasn't quite honed yet in the general world. But as years have passed, this has become quite a tool. And so the main reason I wanted to do it was twofold. One was to get an idea of how things change throughout the winter and also from year to year, but also to give a person who went onto the website and went onto these maps, looking specifically for, say, maybe they wanted to see where you could go to see concentrations of ferruginous hawks, or where you could see big concentrations of eagles, you know, that kind of a thing. And then if they want to take a field trip to go, these would be the concentration areas that they would want to focus on, because they could see a number of birds. And so that was something that I was looking forward to having at some point. And Kevin really came through with this. This has been a phenomenal tool. We're even expanding this going into this winter, and I won't get into that now, but I will with the people that are involved in the project this winter, because I'll be explaining some things to them as we get closer to the season. But suffice it to say, these maps are an important part of this project, and I really like them. Red-tailed hawks, pretty distinctive red tail there on the left. The picture on the right kind of shows you how they usually have chocolate brown heads with a nice demarcation line at the neck and a white chest area, belly band, all good field characteristics for red-tailed hawks. When they're flying, the underparts, you can see the black leading edge of the wings, which is indicative of red tails. You can also again see the belly band and the white chest and the brown head with the nice demarcation line there. If you see birds on the back, you can notice this area right in here, the middle of the back. You can kind of see some white feathering that kind of forms a loose V. That's pretty noticeable in the field. So if you got a bird of prey that's perched on a limb that's looking away from you, you can't pick up these other characteristics if it was looking at you. So, but if you see that loose V, you're going to be seeing a red-tailed hawk. And red-tailed hawks can be a challenge sometimes, even though they're the most common bird, because they come in a variety of colors. Unbelievable, from really dark birds to really light birds and in between. But they will have the characteristic red tail like you see on the perch here, and they'll have those white feathers in the back that show up, even though they may have a full dark chest, different coloration on the belly, from dark to light. Of course, we're dealing with birds of prey, so they catch their prey and consume it that way. And these are just some pictures of examples. We got a rabbit, we got a snake over here, and this guy in the middle, he's got a weasel in his claws. Which when I saw that picture, I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I had to put that one in there. You don't see a predator taking a predator too often. And these two pictures, well, the picture on the left fine tunes what I said about the white V on the back. You can see them quite clearly here, here, a little bit here, here, and here. Birds looking away from you. This one obviously has a red tail, so you can see it. But if you get some immatures or some color variations and you can't pick up red, that's pretty indicative of red tail. And of course, this guy right here, you can see the front of him, and that shows pretty much the classic details of a red tail hawk. And Chuck took this picture. I assume that was not during the winter. Is that right, Chuck? You remember that, taking that picture? Oh, okay, I can't hear you, but that's okay. Anyway, this just shows you, these two pictures here show you how birds can use artificial perch sites just as well as trees. Pretty cool picture of a congregation of birds on that.
Yeah, you can tell that's not in the wintertime there because the water's running.
Right.
It goes off about October. So that's
Yeah.
probably a late September kind of a thing.
Okay.
As the birds are moving in just to start the winter raptor season, then that's kind of what they do here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. 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 Okay. All right. And then sometimes red tails, for some odd reason, the one species that I see that's involved in fights all the time is red tail hawks. Usually it's against an American kestrel, but in this instance, the northern harrier was disagreeing with red tail coming into its territory, so it engaged. And of course, the natural defense for birds of prey are these guys right here. It's not the beak, it's the talons. And so they flip over on their backs when they're engaging with another bird of prey that's attacking them. This series shows a peregrine falcon that was protecting its nesting territory. That's the serious stuff for a red tail when a peregrine falcon decides to start biting on them, because they get a good shellacking on from those talons that the peregrines have. This one survived, but you can see again the defensive posture in that center picture there, trying to keep from getting killed in midair. I actually saw a similar event like this last winter on a survey I was doing. I saw a pair of peregrines doing a courtship flight in February, and they were flying around in this big open field really fast, and they were no close. It was just like watching a pair of blue angels flying in formation, because they were very close, but they were moving fast and doing dives and swing, just all kinds of stuff. And then a red-tailed hawk came into the picture, right into the field. Stupid move. The male peregrine immediately went airborne straight up and started stooping on that red tail, and he hit him 8 times before the red tail finally got into the trees. Pretty amazing display of power and aggressiveness from the peregrine. It's pretty cool. Sometimes the data that we have are used by, by the program that's active at the Portland Airport and also at SeaTac. There's a project there that traps birds that are using the fields in the runway areas, and then they color tag them so that they can be identified later on with these patagial tags here that you can read easily, perched and flying. And the person that does most of the banding there has used our data numerous times to be able to relocate these trapped birds into areas where there are a lot of concentrated red-tailed hawks, similar to that density and distribution map that I showed you earlier. And she's released them into those areas, and very seldom do they come back. They'll pair up with other red tails, and that's what they want. They don't want these birds to come back. And if they do come back, they know who they are, they know where they released them, and maybe they can find another place to release them the next time. But our database is used in that manner, which is kind of cool. Okay, the second most prevalent bird is the American kestrel. And these guys are quite beautiful. Roughly 22% of them are the 22% of the total birds counted are kestrels. And you can see from this map that they're pretty well spread out throughout the whole project area. And they maintained that percentage last year as well. Here's some pictures that Chuck took of a male and a female. Good comparison of their plumages differences. And then here's some actual pairs together in the field so that you can see them and compare them. They have, I think a lot of us have seen these birds throughout our birding experiences. They like to perch hunt mostly, but they will hover hunt as well. So their range and their coverage of catching prey is pretty broad. They can cover a lot of territory by hover hunting as well. And of course, they'll go fly out in the middle of a field and stop and flutter their wings in place and look down on the ground for their prey, which is significant because they have a variety of things that they eat. This one up here on the left caught a bird. They are a falcon. They will chase birds. This one caught a dragonfly. This one got a snake. And these guys got rodents. So their diet is diverse and they're skilled hunters. And the next bird, the harriers, one of the big five. They also have plumage differences between male and female. And they are as well spread out throughout the project area. I suspect that as we progress in the number of years that we have done surveys in Washington, that these black dots, a lot of these will change to red, similar to what you see in Oregon and Idaho over here. In time, most of these routes will pick up all five of the big five species, except maybe the rough-legged hawk. That might be a little tougher one to do on the west side of the Cascades, but they have been there. Here's some pictures of male harriers, perched and flying, so you can see the undercarriage on them. Very prominent facial discs. You can see on this bird right over here on the right, you can see that disc. And they have a little mask that goes around their eyes, like you can see on the other two pictures. That's pretty prevalent in the field. And it's a good indicator that, you know, for a northern harrier, they almost look like an owl, but obviously they're not. Females are pretty much a tawny color, browns and dull whites. And of course, on this picture over here on the right, you can see the predominant white tail butt area of the bird, as opposed to a rough-legged hawk, which the white is out on the tail itself, and I'll show you pictures of that. But the females are streaked like this, as opposed to the darker juveniles, which have pretty much a solid coppery chest the first year, and then they molt into their male and female feathering, whatever they are. And of course, these guys, the way they hunt, and I'm sure some of you have seen this happen, you know, they course around low over fields, and then if they see something right underneath them, they immediately jump down and go after the prey. They're not a perch hunter. They like to cruise the fields, and so they can cover a lot of ground too. But they also can take water birds like this poor coot here. And then we have the bald eagle, the majestic bald eagle. This is a killer shot. This is one of my favorite pictures. Max is a surveyor up in Goldendale, Washington. So he's got eagles up there that he's done really well with photos. Of course, when they're perched, they're quite regal in their appearance. It's It's not hard to not like a bald eagle when you see them. They are spread out quite a bit too in the project, which is nice to see. Being that 40, 50 years ago, they were in deep trouble. They've come back like gangbusters, and it's really nice to see. This picture here, I put this one in here just to show you how they are spread out and where the big concentrations are. Along the Columbia River, you've got several areas. They follow the smelt and the salmon upstream throughout the winter. The Willamette Valley over here, where I take my surveys, do my surveys, it's primarily sheep that they're after, dead sheep. We got a lot of sheep that are brought into the valley during the winter for lambing, and that has increased many-fold over the last 10 years, 12 years or so. And as a result, bald eagle populations are really building up in the winter months for bald eagles. It's not uncommon for me to count at least 150 eagles in a survey on one of my 2 surveys over here. Klamath Basin, they're primarily after waterfowl. Some of these outlying ones, like here in the Fort Rock area, and well, let's see. Now that's the Silver Lake area and Lakeview. These areas are probably as a result of calving operations. If there's water in the area, is fine too. They'll catch fish, but primarily it can be pretty unique depending on where they live as to what they eat. This is a picture a friend of mine took that shows what what another bird is looking at if an eagle is saying, "Get out of my territory," kind of thing. That's a pretty dramatic shot. The food that they eat is diverse. And actually, during the winter months, they're primarily getting whatever they can find. And most of it is through scavenging. This picture here is indicative of the summer months, and maybe the winter too, if they're catching steelhead or something in a river. But my area here is sheep concentrated. Klamath Basin is the waterfowl over here. On the coast, it's anything that washes up on the beach. Seals, sea lions, pelicans. This guy here probably caught that grebe, probably dive bombed it a number of times until it wore the bird out and he could grab it. But they're very opportunistic hunters, and they will take anything that they figure they can get easily. You got to keep in mind that when birds are in the winter months, and I alluded to it a little earlier ago, they burn a lot of calories just to maintain their body heat. And so it's important for them to replenish as often as they can. And that allows them the desire to do that, to eat anything that they can find. The next 5 series of pictures here is an example of one of the project volunteers that does the Grangeville survey route in central Idaho. Lives on the Clearwater River, and they have a major highway that goes in front of their house. And so every once in a while, a dead deer shows up because somebody hit it. And he's got permission to take the deer down to the river so that the eagles can feed on it. And of course, his back patio is sitting right next to the river, and he's a tremendous photographer. And these next pictures are some examples of the interactions that eagles will do to each other over a food item here, this dead deer. You'll notice that antler was cut off. There's a couple of adults trying to determine who's boss. Another juvenile and an adult trying to determine who wants that food more. Another decision-making circumstance there. Who's going to win? But yeah, the first time I saw these series of pictures, it just about knocked me off my chair. They're just unbelievable. Okay, and then the fifth and final big five species is the rough-legged hawk. This picture shows real clearly the distinguishing characteristics of the black wrist circles here and the broad white tail band on the feathering and not on the rump like on a harrier. The body, the head is usually a lighter color, but the body can have different configurations depending on the age of the bird and the sex of the bird. But you're always going to get these black patches and the white tail band to distinguish. They're pretty well spread out. I think if I had the density and distribution map up on this one, you would see that most of them are on the west side of the Cascades, east side. I'm sorry. We have had west side sightings up for most of the routes, but they're not. It's not a major wintering area for rough-legged hawks. They're mainly on the east side of the Cascades. These two pictures here kind of show perched birds. You can see on the right-hand side this black wristband here and the white tail here. One thing that I do is I do get probably a couple dozen rough-legged hawks that winter on a couple of my routes each winter. And this is pretty indicative. John Sullivan is a birder over here in Eugene, does one of my Eugene routes. These birds like to perch on tops of small bushes. They're not a massive tree percher like a red-tailed hawk. So usually if you see a buteo silhouetted out on a smaller tree or a brush out in the middle of a field, my first thought is rough-legged hawk, and then I verify. And most of the time it is rough-legged hawk. It could be a red tail. But they like to perch on these little branches. They got smaller feet, I think. So they can handle that. They come in a couple of flavors, the light color morph on the left and the dark color morph on the right. I can guarantee you when you see this dark morph for the first time in your life, you're going to say, what the heck is that? Because that's exactly what I said when I saw my first one. And then I realized what it was, but it's a stunning, stunning looking bird. These are a dime a dozen. These are maybe 1 or 2% of the population. So you count yourself lucky when you see one. And they have a unique style of hunting. They're not a perch hunter. They're a hover hunter, just like a kestrel can do, but only these guys are big birds. And it's really interesting to see them stationary, hovering out in a field looking for prey. But when you stop to think about it, these birds are Arctic birds. They're tundra birds. That's where they're raised. And there are no perches up there to speak of. So they've adapted to being able to hover like this. Their wing load is different than some of the other raptors. They can manipulate air much better than some of the other buteos like red tails and red-shouldered hawks. So that's their way of catching food. And then we got eagles. We got the golden eagle, which you can obviously see why they call them golden eagles. Really gold mane, gold neck hackles, feathers. Big hunters. They're, and I don't know whether this will increase up in Washington, the black dots turning more red. But down here in the lower portion of Idaho and Eastern Oregon, this is their stronghold right here. And again, like rough-legged hawks, they can be found over here on the east side, but just in 1s and 2s. Over here, you can see several at a time on a survey. Here's a really good picture showing the gold hackles that give it its name. This picture is of a juvenile bird. They have the white tail band, which disappears when they become an adult. And this picture here shows the white tail band, and it also shows the base of the secondaries and other feathers that come in here in the middle of the wing that disappear when it's an adult bird. Over on the left there. The ferruginous hawk is an Eastern Oregon bird, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen. I love these birds. They're beautiful birds. I've had the chance to see some on a couple of my routes in the Willamette Valley. They're rare, but they do exist over here. And the first thing when I see these birds, they're usually perched out in the field on the ground. And if I can see the front of it, it's a brilliant white, much whiter than a red-tailed hawk. Very noticeable. As you can see from the map, they're mostly in Eastern Oregon and Southern Idaho bird. Few routes in the Willamette Valley, a few routes up in Washington. They have a couple different color variations as well. You get some of them that have this really prominent red on the under wings. And streaking on the belly and the chest area. They mostly all have this red leggings area here, whether it be a dark color bird or a really light color bird like this. This is a really gorgeous picture, this one on the right. I like that bird. The backside of ferruginous hawks have telltale signs too. They've got these white wing patches at the end of the wing. And they have pretty much a white tail streaked with different colors of brown and grays, but predominantly white. And they have these red shoulder patches that you can see on both birds. Ferruginous means red. That's a scientific kind of a name. Iron, ferruginous. It's all red, and they're really nice looking birds. Over here on the west side, we have the red-shouldered hawk, and to me, this is a really starkly colored bird. I don't know if any of you have seen them or not, but they're predominantly over here on the west side of the Cascades in Oregon. Now, as we progress further up into Washington, when we get more routes up in the southern section here, I'm assuming we're going to see some more birds up in this area over time. The ones on the east side are pretty much pioneer sightings, with the exception of maybe down in the Klamath Basin, and I think maybe there's a few that are starting to take a stronghold in your area. But when I first started the project, these birds were pretty much relegated to this very southwest portion of Oregon. Grants Pass area, the coastal area, and a little dribble up into the Eugene area. But they've really taken off over the last 10 or 15 years and have explored a lot of territory, become very entrenched all up and down the west side of Oregon, and have moved again into Eastern Oregon. And we even have one right here that was found on the Payette route in Idaho. And there's been a couple sighted way down here in the southeast corner as well, but not on routes yet. Very colorful birds, the adult birds especially, very stark black and white patterns, profuse white, a lot of white. Really nice color cinnamon undersides of the wings and the body. You can see the red shoulders here in the center upper picture and the right picture. They also have these white crescent areas out at the base of the primaries that do show up when you see one flying. And it shows up in both adults and in the juvenile birds too. The juvenile birds are much more streaky and blotchy patterned on the chest, as opposed to the reddish color. And they are not as stark white and black on the back yet, but they do have a lot of mottling on the back. And if you see a bird that's looking away from you and perched, if you see that, it's a good indication that you're looking at a red-shouldered hawk, at least over here in the valley. The red tails aren't as profuse a spotting as the red-shouldered hawks are. And then we have the Swainson's hawk. Of course, the prominent theory of these guys with fact behind them is that they're a bird that completely vacates North America during the wintertime, but it's not true. A lot of these birds that we've had on the surveys are usually birds that have come back and found on March surveys, or maybe an early November survey. But we have solid documentation with photos and observations by people who know these birds of individuals during the wintertime. And my suspicion is that as over the next few decades, as we see climate changing and becoming warmer and warmer, their food base will stay active and provide for some birds to stay longer, if not throughout the winter. That's my guess. That's my guess. It's just my thinking, but I can't discount the effect of climate change with this particular species. But they are scattered throughout the project in usually very single observations, usually 1 month. They do come in 3 different color phases. The light on the left, the intermediate in the middle, and the very dark birds on the right. You can see the pattern also in the flights. And you know, people that don't want to accept Swainson's hawk sightings in the winter tend to think that people are seeing red-tailed hawks. So I put this picture in here for comparison's sake, just so that you can look at these birds, and if you see a bird that has a solid black half of a wing, like these over here on the left, the Swainson's hawk, with no belly band and no black patagial feathers right in the front part of the wrist here, you could be looking at a Swainson's hawk. There are differences between the two that if you pay attention to what you're looking at, you might be able to easily discern that. We had one of these guys here, a Swainson's hawk, documented by Dan Hirely over here on his route last November. So they can be seen. White-tailed kites, a very diminutive bird, very nice looking, sharp looking bird. Used to be called black-shouldered kite for obvious reasons. They are pretty much a Western Oregon bird, although we've had a few sightings on our surveys of birds down here in the Klamath Basin, but predominantly over here. And unlike the red-shouldered hawk that I told you expanded, these white-tailed kites have decreased with these red dots not having birds anymore. We had a couple of winters back in the 2008, 9, 10 area that all of a sudden, I mean, we had birds scattered up and down the valley and along the coast pretty much each month on most of the routes. And they've retreated now to just maybe a few of these routes along the coastal areas here. Coos Bay is a really good area to see them, and Tillamook Bay area is a really good area to find them. They also hover hunt, just like the rough-legged hawks and kestrels. They have these white or these black wing spots similar to rough-legged hawks, but there's no comparison with that one. And again, the black-shouldered kite, that's how they got their name. Here's a picture of an adult on the left and a juvenile on the right. You can see the brown feathering the juveniles have the first year. Pretty good indication. That's what you're looking at. Then we get into the falcons. This is the peregrine falcon. Flying bullets. They are just super speed birds. They're pretty well scattered throughout the project area as well, which is nice to see, like the eagles, because they were hurting as well from DDT and all that nasty stuff. I don't know whether Kevin's here or not, but he's telling me I think that this bird here either nested or hung around the hospital in there in Bend. They're kind of a cosmopolitan. They can be a cosmopolitan bird. I remember one time I was up in Portland, had to visit a doctor up there, and I was waiting at the front of the line for a red light on Burnside, going up the hill. And right in front of me flew a peregrine falcon with a pigeon in its claws. And it was no further than 3 or 4 feet off the sidewalk. And he flew continuously down the sidewalk and scared some people. It was funny. But this bird was taking its prey to its nesting site. I think they have it on the I-405 bridge, maybe one of the other bridges in across the Columbia there, or the Willamette. They have a nesting pair. And so that's where that bird was headed. It was heading in that right direction. So they can mingle with people. But they're also, out in the wild. These are coastal shots here, the one on the left and right. The one in the center, John took. I don't know exactly where he took that, but you can see the dark helmet on here and the big cheek patch and the really dark color backs on them. Different than these guys, which are another bigger falcon as opposed to kestrels and merlins. But the prairie falcon is a much more tawnier color. The mallard stripe, which is what we call this here, is surrounded by 2, areas of solid white. Very, very stark contrast there. They are again scattered throughout. Most of the areas are east of the Cascades, but they do visit the valley in small numbers. And again, you can see the stripe here underneath its eye. This is the front and back picture, as opposed, this is a, kind of a sandy, dusty, brownish, tannish color, as opposed to the dark peregrines. And they have really white chests with really fine spotting. It's a pretty bird. And if you catch them flying, you can see the telltale, what we call black armpits, the axillaries right in against the base of the body. And then you can also see the very thin stripe here below the eye on both birds there. They are bird hunters, but they are also our mammal hunters. They like ground squirrels. Kevin got a really nice series of shots here of one being taken home to the babies to eat. It's a spring picture, but they hunt mammals throughout the winter months too. Maybe not these guys in particular, because they go underground, but they will collect birds and mammals both. And then we've got the Merlin, and they come in 3 distinct color patterns too, a really light prairie subspecies, a really dark Pacific subspecies, and one that's fairly colorful, multicolored taigas. They are scattered pretty uniformly throughout the project area. You don't see too many of them at a time. I saw 3 on one survey, and that was pretty cool. But usually you see 1, maybe 2. This is a good look at their flight featherings, the underside of the bird when they're flying. One thing that you can do to distinguish merlins between kestrels when you see a small falcon out in the field, especially if they're flying, is that these guys, merlins, are like bullets. They are a point A to point B, no nonsense, straight, fast flight. If you study kestrels, they're going to have a little buoyancy to their flight, and not as direct. And these guys move fast. They're just bullets, is all I can say. And then the big one. To me, this is my favorite raptor in the whole project. I've been blessed to see 8 of these over the course of the years that I've been doing surveys. They come down into the Willamette Valley, primarily chasing waterfowl, and principally the smaller dusky Canada geese and the cacklers primarily. And that set of claws right there is deadly. I guarantee it. The first bird that I ever saw, first deer falcon that I ever saw, was one that was hunting and took a goose out of midair. He went in behind a flock of about 20 cacklers and just watched and watched, and then all of a sudden, pew, went right in like a rocket and nailed one of those geese and took it all the way down and started eating it right away. They're a strong, powerful bird. And I think that they can be prevalent more in Oregon than people think, mainly because they can be passed off quite casually as a perching red-tailed hawk. I know, I've done it. They're about the same size. They're big, bulky falcons. I call them the street brawlers of the falcon family, because they're just massive and muscular, as opposed to the finesse hunters like peregrines and prairies. But these guys are big. And so I guess just to say that if you're out doing these surveys, for those that are listening, or if you're out there just looking around, you know, if you see a bulky bird sitting on the cross arm of a power line, just make sure it's a red tail. You might be surprised sometime. They are spotty throughout the project, not very many, 30 some odd routes out of the 452. But like I said, I've got these guys here on my routes. Matter of fact, I was blessed one day to find all 5 species of falcons in one survey, which I don't think has been done very often, but I just got lucky, Here's a couple of flight pictures of deer falcons. This bird here on the left was found 2 winters ago in the Horse Hills area west of Tri-Cities in southeastern Washington. And this guy here on the right was found on a route up in on the Waterville Plateau, which is a higher elevation up from Wenatchee, Washington. You can notice on these particular falcons the size of the tail. And in this next picture, well, that's a closer up picture of the one that was in outside of the Tri-Cities. But they have big tails. And that's helpful when you're looking at trying to determine whether it's a peregrine or a prairie or a deer falcon, because their feather tips of the wings that you see here on the right picture fall quite short of the tips of the tails of the tips of the tail feathers. And that's really noticeable. It makes those tails look monstrous, really, when a bird is perched. And so it's a good characteristic. And they too have these stripes below the eye, but it's kind of a diffuse area behind it, as opposed to that stark white for a prairie falcon. And like I said, these guys are big. They're red-tailed hawk big. And so they really can't be confused with peregrines and prairies if you've got a comparison to look at. Okay, we get into the accipiters. Cooper's hawk, they are pretty common. These are the juvenile pictures. And I'm going to show you a slide here towards the end of the Coopers and Sharpshin section here that compares these, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But in this picture here, you'll notice the tail tips down here in the left picture are staggered, going shorter and shorter as you go up the tail. You notice the same thing over here on the one on the right. And then you've got real thin, narrow streaking on birds on the immature Coopers. And that comes into play when you compare it with a Sharpshin, which I'll show you here in a minute. They are scattered throughout the project. Not in big numbers. You don't see rarely more than 1 or 2 if you're lucky. This is the Sharpshin hawk. And you can see the squared off tail on this one on the left and on the right, both. These are adults. And you'll notice on the back of the head here, on this bird on the right, and also on the left, there's a gray diffusion down the back of the neck, as opposed to, I'm going to back it up here in a minute. as opposed to a stark cap that you see on a Cooper's hawk. That's noticeable if you've got good lighting. If you don't have good lighting, that can be a real tough ID characteristic to nail down. Here's a picture of some juveniles perched and in flight. You'll notice that the juveniles don't have that streaking. They have a lot of blotchiness to them. Diamond-shaped markings, very thin tail, toes, and shins. They are also scattered throughout the project area. And this picture here gives you an indication of how thin these legs are. That's how they get their name, sharp shin. Very narrow shins, very bony structure. These are both juveniles feeding on their prey. So this is the comparison picture. If you have the opportunity, first of all, let's look at the juveniles. If you have an opportunity to see the front part of an accipiter perched, and you know it's a juvenile because it doesn't have the red feathering like the adults do. If your first impression is look at that white chest, shows up white, as opposed to a more dingier color on the right, that keys me in that it's probably a Cooper's hawk, and then I can start looking at some of the other characteristics, such as the big feet, big full feet and shin areas and the wrist areas there, as opposed to the bony structures and the thin areas of the legs on the two sharp shins. And especially over here on this adult on the left here, the adult Cooper's hawk, massive feet, massive feet. You can see down here in the bottom, again, the comparison between the tail tips. Again, on the left for the juvenile, you can see the staggered, smaller tail feathers going up the tail, as opposed to more uniform length on the sharp shin. And on the adults, you can see the staggering over here. That thorn there is improperly placed, but you can still see it, as opposed to straight across area over here on the sharp shin on the right. So there are characteristics that you can focus on. It takes some time to catch these things. I mean, you spend a lot of time doing these surveys. You get to pick up on some of these characteristics that maybe you might not read about. And for the juveniles especially, this white chest keys it for me. I immediately think of that. And then I go through the process of looking at the feet, looking at the tails, and seeing what I can come up with. The third accipiter is the goshawk. Tough hunters. They're killer machines. They really are. They are numerous, more than I was expecting to as the years went by, but we keep getting more sightings of them. So I'm pleased to see that, roughly 20% of the routes have them now on record. Here's some pictures of comparing the adult on the left and 3 shots of pictures of juveniles in the center and right. Notice on the tail feathers, these black and gray barrings, which the other 2 accipiters have as well. But you notice the real irregularity of the edges of these bands. That will signify if that's all you can see. This particular picture here was sent to me, and the guy said, "What is this?" And so I wrote back and told him and explained the differences there. But that's a pretty good indicator of what you look at. And they have really heavy streaking chests. Very dark bird. We get a few osprey that overwinter, mostly on the coast of Oregon. I think we've had 1 sighting in Washington so far. But these are obviously not winter pictures. These are summer pictures. But just to give you some close-up, looks at the bird to see, how they differ from bald eagles, for example. They are different, but some people can get them confused because they see the black and the white heads. No, I guess not yet. Well, we had some this past winter right in here. But by and large, they're an Oregon bird and mostly coastal. Although they'll be near any body of water associated with their food source. A couple of shots of a bird hunting. A friend of mine has a place here in Western Oregon, outside of Corvallis, that these guys regularly fish because the state fish and game people stock the fishing for, or stock the ponds on the state area for fishermen. And these guys take full advantage. As you can see, these are all shots taken there. And another series, one taking a dive, and you can see the head of this in the center picture. You can see the head of the victim right there as he's being carted off in the right picture. Okay, now we'll get into the owls. Great horned owl is by far the most prevalent owl in the surveys database, and they're seen primarily because they are very early nesters, and their nest bowls, their nest sites, are very visible in leafless trees on these routes. So that's how we can get this kind of coverage and visibility of these birds. If they weren't nesting, you probably wouldn't see nearly as many as we see now, or that we see on the nests. Here's some just general shots of great horned owls. That lower right-hand picture, can you see the second owl? On the right-hand side there, tucked underneath the limb there, he's pretty camouflaged. They're hard to see even in daylight when you're looking at them. I put this nesting situation in because you're not going to see owlets during the survey season, obviously, but this is a result, and there's one clear over here to make 3. The barn owl, fairly secretive. We catch them maybe flying in the afternoons. Some people actually have structures on their routes that they can look into and actually see them roosting in there. So we do get representation from barn owls. A couple of flight picture and some perching ones. This one in the center here, Rick Vetter took over in Eastern Oregon at night. It's a night shot. So the color's a little different. Burrowing owls, they're a real cutie. They don't hang around too often in the project area, but for some odd reason, these 3 routes down here are my routes, and I get to see them darn near every year. It's amazing. They're scattered. You can see only 18 routes so far up through last winter have recorded them, and mostly they're migrated further south, but they are seen every once in a while, as you can see. There's a couple of perch in a flight picture. They're real diminutive, very small birds, very short wings, compact flight. This owl here, last winter in November, this little guy here showed up in the middle of a snow event in central Idaho on the Grangeville route, and in a hole there was a hole there that it stayed in. It only stayed for about 4 or 5 days, but it just so happened that the surveyors caught it when they were doing their survey. So they got this picture, and that's very unusual. They should be much further south than they are now. This guy on the right here was this particular road culvert that's busted up in pieces is a preferred site. I can almost every year count on seeing a burrowing owl in that culvert. And I have another culvert that is also used as well. I'm lucky. I'm lucky to get to see him every winter, just about. they do get banded. This picture on the left was taken up in the Hermiston area or Pendleton area where they have the old Army storage areas. There's been a concerted effort over the last couple decades to put out artificial nesting, underground nesting cavities, and they've been able to raise a ton of these little birds where they would never have had a chance to do it. The one on the right was a bird that was found on my route, and you'll notice the leg bands down here. The guy that took this picture was had been finishing up. He'd finished up a nearby route that he does for me outside of Brownsville, and he came over and was driving my route. I hadn't seen this bird yet, and he took these pictures and he wrote to me that night. He says, "Look what you got on your route." And I go, "Whoa!" So I traced these bands. I know two of the primary burrowing owl researchers and banders that do a lot of work with this species. And we're able to finally figure out that this bird was banded as a juvenile bird in Kamloops, British Columbia. And it came all the way down to stay on one of my routes in the middle of the winter. And it stayed all winter. It's amazing. Haven't heard any records of this in the last 6 years, but at least we were able to document it. And when we got a hold of the bander, she was totally ecstatic, as you might imagine. Any bander puts band on birds, they love to get band returns. Short-eared owls, fairly common. I'm sure we'll get more up in Washington as the years go by, but they're a pretty neat bird. You got some areas outside of Bend that record them recently, so there's an opportunity for you to see them out there. Chuck can probably elaborate on that at some point. A couple more short. You can see the short ears that they have, giving them their name. They like upland brush areas as well as marsh areas. Two pictures depict that.
We did, Jeff, we did have a couple of records of that species last year in the alfalfa area, but that was pretty unusual. We haven't had too many in Deschutes County. Now in Crook County, we have a roosting spot where they're pretty regular.
Good. Okay. Are there northern harriers that roost in that roost site too?
You can tell it's the change of the guard. The harriers, okay. The harriers go to bed and the owls come out at just about the same time.
Yeah. Have you had any interactions that you've observed between the two?
Sure. You can actually see that sometimes the best time to find the owls, initially, is to just follow the harriers.
Yeah.
They fly over the top of the owls. The owls will hop up and try to harass them.
Good input, because that happens to me every winter. I have a roost on one of my routes that I've counted as many as 17 coming out in the evening. And like you said, as the harriers are coming in, the short-eared owls are coming out, and invariably there'll be some interaction between the two. But these, if anybody has ever seen these owls fly, they're like a big moth. They just kind of flutter up and down, get that kind of a thing, and really noticeable flight patterns. Do a lot of gliding too. Beautiful birds, especially if you get the sun right on them in dusk time. Western screech owls, they're not easy to find for obvious reasons. They'll roost in the daytime, and if you see a tree like this at a distance, you're not going to pick up that owl, but sometimes you get lucky. We've had these sightings in the past. This little this route right here north of Boise is a guy that has the owls nesting and roosting in his boxes right on his property, and he starts his route with those birds just about every time. Not too many, obviously, as you can see, 17 or 18 birds over the course of the 17 years. Some more roosting pictures. The northern pygmy owl, different story. We've got a fair number of those. They're they're day hunters, and so they're going to be out and about. And if you're lucky enough to come across one, that's great. We've had almost 60 routes that have recorded them in that manner. These guys are really tough hunters. I'll show you these pictures here in a minute. This is just some shots. This picture was taken during a survey up in Sandpoint, Idaho last winter, or 2 winters ago. You notice on this lower left picture here of this bird, when you see looking at the back, you see these 2 black spots here. When I was a young student at Oregon State in one of my wildlife classes, the professor told me that those are there to discourage predators coming up from behind them. I don't know whether that's been documented through research, but it kind of makes sense. You know, a predator looking down on a bird like that with those 2 eyes, he may think, well, that's a pretty big bird. He's got big eyes. Maybe I shouldn't handle it. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's a good story. But this gives you an indication of their diet. They'll take lizards, like on the left. This picture in the right here, or in the center, I should say, Jack Williamson took this summer near the Black Butte Ranch. He watched this bird attack a robin nest. Was attracted by the adults giving holy heck noises and bombings and stuff, but this bird went right in there and grabbed that young bird right out of the nest. The one on the right, obviously, took an adult one. I think that's a junco, but they're prolific hunters, very, very adept at catching food. Long-eared owl is a tough one to find. Not too many spots have found them, mostly east of the Cascades. You know, I've seen one in my lifetime down at Malheur. But if you see one, count yourself lucky. Here's a picture of one in flight taken by a guy that does survey for me over on the coast. But you can see right here at the top of the head, the ears folded back. I'll call them ears, but they're feather tufts. That's a pretty good picture. Then you got the northern saw-whet owl, very small, diminutive thing that is really good at hiding. They roost mostly during the daytime, and unless you know where a roost is, you're probably not going to find them. You really got to dig for those guys. This is what they like to roost in. You know, they tuck themselves up in tree branches, and they're difficult to find. Some ones in the owls. This picture on the right here was found by one of my guys in outside of Boise. Somebody found it perched or roosting in pine trees on a park in downtown Boise, and so he got a picture of it. The barred owl, interesting species. They have been growing in numbers. Obviously, we all know that, but they're really showing up now more and more on routes. When we first started, the only routes that had them were down here in the southwest coastal area. And that was because they were up river systems and lots of trees, and the guys knew where they were and they picked them off when he was doing a survey. But they have expanded, and you can see they're starting to show up in places where you wouldn't expect them to sometimes. But you know, it's good that we're documenting it because they're increasing more and more each year. And there's some perch shots and one flight shot. Shows the streaking on the chest versus spotting that you see on a spotted owl. Snowy owls, interruptive species. You're not going to see them every year. But we have an area that we've got into the project 2 years ago, right up here in the central part of eastern Washington, up on the Waterville Plateau, like I said, outside of Wenatchee, which is right here. This area apparently is a frequent wintering area for snowy owls. The first year we found 8 in a survey, and the second excuse me, Siri's talking to me. The second year, last year, they had 7. So we're hoping, obviously we hope every year that we're going to get some more, but I'm really excited because all of the the routes up here in the northwest quadrant of Washington, above Seattle, up in the Skagit Flats area and the Samish Flats area, and some other areas up in that neck of the woods, they see snowy owls quite often. So I'm hoping to get some more snowy owls in the database this year with these new routes that I have up there. Just some perching pictures. The 2 on the right are in a big rock outcropping that was up on the Wenatchee, up on the Waterville Plateau outside of Wenatchee. So those are route birds. This one on the left, I put this picture on the left just so that you guys can see what their feet look like. You know, they're a tundra bird, so they're, you know, they have the feathering to protect themselves. And normally when you see them perched, you look at these other perched birds and they have their feathers drooped up over their feet. So you really can't see them. But over here on the left, you can see what those feet look like. And I don't think I'd want to be on the receiving end of those talons. They're pretty good sized feet. There's just some pictures here, more, these 2 on the right, more up on the Waterville Plateau. This picture in the center was a coastal bird that was the same picture sequence as this one. This bird was taking off out of the brush on grasslands area on the coast, and he took a sequence shot. This is the same photographer that found that burrowing owl that was from Canada. Gorgeous pictures. You know, they're stunning, absolutely stunning. Great gray owls, very infrequent findings. We had Tom Lawler has found them on the Klamath Forest route, right there. And there's not too many others that you can find. The Milton Freewater route up here, and then a couple of Idaho Falls area routes. Of course, again, this is from 2 years ago. We have 4 more routes that have recorded them since. Some close-up shots, big facial disc, big owls. They're the biggest ones that we've got. Here's some pictures of an owl that Teresa took over in the Idaho Falls area that they were out hunting a field. You can see they're gliding and how they look down, you know. Amazing birds. I have yet to see one in my lifetime. I need to see one of these guys. And of course, the famous Central Oregon northern hawk owl. I don't know how many of you were listening had a chance to see this, but it was the very first year of the project, February 2005. And this bird took up residence in an area southeast of Bend. Very cosmopolitan species in this instance. Kevin Smith got some great shots of this bird over the several months that it was there. But Kevin Body got this on his Bend alfalfa route. And he could see where, with his scope, he could see the bird from one of the roads that was on his route. So we got him. It's the only one. It's the only northern hawk owl in the whole database history. I suspect at some point we should get some northern Washington routes that will get a couple of these in time. Then there's the infamous zone-tailed hawk. This bird is not the bird that was seen on the route. I just grabbed something off the internet to show it, but it was found several years back on a route in extreme southeast Idaho, and it was well described by the guy who saw it, who was quite versed in bird surveys. He'd been doing Christmas bird counts and breeding bird surveys for decades, and he was quite shocked when he saw it. but he had no camera, couldn't document it. He documented as best he could in a write-up, which I have in the records, but that's the only record. You know, I'm of the opinion that anything that can fly can be anywhere at any time. Really, you know, this would, if it could be documented, it would have been the first first documentation of that species in Idaho. But it wasn't, so it's, you know, it's a nebulous thing out there. But at least we have a record of it. And if somebody wants to research our database and do something with our numbers, they're welcome to discount it. You know, it's an anomaly, but so are these guys. The crescent caracara obviously is a southwest bird. Cactus don't grow like that in our project area, but they are quite mobile. And the year that we saw this one on the left, this was seen just south of Corvallis, Oregon, right smack in the middle of one of the routes that we have in the project. It was found in March. And we started putting a history of sightings together that were made for this bird. And it could be followed from right up the coast and then inland across to the Willamette Valley by different sightings and different dates. And we assume that it's the same bird because, you know, it was only one. But it hung around for several weeks, no, about a week, in one particular area on the route south of Corvallis. And a lot of people got to see it. And I tried my best to get the person to do a survey so we could officially put it in the database, but to no avail. It was March, and March is an optional month for the survey, like I mentioned earlier. And the person was busy doing other things, so she couldn't get the survey done. The other one was found on a route that I had not established yet in Howe, Idaho, which is right at the base of the mountain areas, just before you start getting into the southern tier of Idaho. And it was the first species documented on a CBC. It was found on the Christmas bird count, and it was right smack in the middle of the route that I finally got put there. But again, it was outside the survey. So that's all of the 31 species. And I'm going to follow up here with a few scenic shots to kind of give you an ooh and ah. Tom Crabtree spent the day one time down in the Fort Rock area, and there was a hellaciously hard hoarfrost that just created some awesome pictures. So I'm going to flip through some of these just to give you an idea of the beauty that's out there that you can see on these surveys. Golden eagle and rough-legged hawk. Here's a rough-legged hawk who's hover hunting. And then, of course, when you know, the end of February, March rolls around, we start picking up migration activity. So birds will be leaving us, and flocks and flocks of eagles like this are real common. Haha. Obviously a Photoshop. A friend of mine put that up there. But it just signifies that, you know, we cut our surveys done in March during the migration startup, and that's the end of the program. I did want to add this picture here. These two books are pretty indispensable if you're interested in Raptor ID. These would be good books to have in your library because they have a lot of pictures of a lot of varieties of color patterns for, you know, a lot of different species, mostly red tails. But they are, the one on the left is more of a desktop resource. The one on the right's a thinner, more mobile book that I usually take out with me when I go on my surveys. So, okay, that's the end of the program. If anybody have any questions that you've been thinking about as we talked, be glad to answer them. Comments, questions?
Well, Jeff, there was no questions submitted to the chat, but I really want to thank you for this
Well,
program. It was actually a marathon for Raptors, for Raptor watchers. And we have a lot of long distance birders here. We held on to 30 of the audience for this 2 hours. So
good, good. I'm glad that we had a good group of people. I can't see them all, but I thank everybody who's still online for watching through the program, and hope, apparently this program is going to be put on the ECAS website. So especially for the pictures, if you want to look back and do some ID work, learn your birds a little bit more. These are the pictures in this slideshow, plus the PowerPoint. There's a lot more pictures in the PowerPoint presentation that I put together that's on the website as well. Between those two items, you should be able to bone up on your Raptor ID and feel confident more and more as you look at these birds. So thank you very much. Like I said, it's been a real pleasure over the last 17 years to be associated with ECAS, and I should give a big shout out to Mr. Gates here, because he was instrumental in getting me to start up this project and to encourage me to develop it the way I have. And all the succeeding presidents, Sherry's one of them. Steve Dugill was instrumental in the early years for supporting this project and supporting my efforts to get a handle on what's going on in the Northwest for birds of prey. And I should say that ECAS is mentioned in everything that I do with this project, and your chapter is well known throughout the Northwest, trust me. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention, and I'll just mention real quick here, is that about 4 or 5 years ago, we finally got a home for our database. Prior to that, it was sitting in my computer, available to anybody who wanted to look at stuff, but nobody did. But we got associated with the Peregrine Fund. And now they welcome our database every year. They have all 17 years of our bird numbers, and they themselves have been creating this massive worldwide birds of prey database for researchers to tap into. And this is where our data is going now. And they have done some preliminary work on analyzing what's going on with the areas of the Northwest that we've been doing with our numbers. Hopefully at some point I can get that out to everybody, but I can't do that in a program like this. That'd have to be something special. But anyway, the Peregrine Fund is a great supporter of this project. And so thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Great job.
Okay. All right. Good to see everybody too.
thank you, Jeff.
Okay, Gordon, thank you for all your help in helping me get this ready, and